Well, I used to be a bid catcher for years in the auction facility, and as I would catch the bids from the audience, I would just yell, yup, yup, yup.
Moments after the lock snapped open, the energy inside the auction yard vanished. What should have been another routine win became something no bidder was prepared for. Dave Hester, the loudest voice in the room, fell completely silent as the reality of what he'd just uncovered set in. Within seconds, celebration turned to shock, and a single storage unit forced everyone present to realize that some doors should never open. This was the bid that changed everything. The auction that altered everything. The Costa Mesa auction yard hummed with its usual charge of anticipation when Dave Hester pulled in that Tuesday morning. By 9 o'clock, the California sun was already unforgiving, and buyers clustered shoulder to shoulder around Unit 73. Dave had spent more than 3 decades in this world. He had cracked open thousands of lockers and built his name on steady nerves and sharp instincts. He was convinced there was nothing left that could catch him off guard. He was mistaken. The day opened like countless others before it. Dave made 2 slow laps around the property before parking, a habit hardened by years of calculation and caution. The turnout was noticeably heavier for a Tuesday, and that caught his eye right away. Bigger crowds usually meant whispers and speculation. He spotted Daryl Sheets near the front, easy to recognize and brimming with confidence, and Ivy Calvin off to the side, arms folded, studying the doors like pieces on a chessboard. What truly unsettled Dave, however, was the presence of 2 unfamiliar faces. A woman in a sleek black suit kept glancing at her phone, while a man beside her stood with the rigid calm of someone trained to observe rather than participate. They did not dress like bidders. They did not scan nearby units. Their attention never drifted from Unit 73. Dan Dotson kicked off the auction in his rapid-fire style. When the door to Unit 73 rattled up, Dave edged closer. At first glance, the contents looked inviting. Furniture covered in dusty sheets, boxes stacked with care, and tucked in the rear several antique-looking trunks that made Dave's instincts spark with promise. Dan worked the crowd and opened bidding. Dave fired first at 500 with his familiar call. Instead of resistance, the numbers jumped quickly. Daryl answered with 700. The woman in black leapt straight to 1,000 without a pause. Ivy drove it higher. The mood sharpened, tight and electric. Something felt off to Dave. The bids were too precise, too determined. Experience told him this was when smart buyers stepped back, but walking away had never been his style. When the price reached 2,000, Dave barked 2,500 with full conviction. The crowd went silent. The woman in black shared a brief look with her companion, a silent exchange Dave could not read. Dan brought the gavel down. Sold. As the crowd scattered, buzzing with speculation, Dave moved toward the unit with his bolt cutters. He felt eyes on him and glanced up. The woman in black was watching. Her expression was not anger or disappointment, it was pity. And in that instant, though he did not yet know why, Dave Hester realized he had just bought far more than a storage unit. The bidding war that felt wrong. Nearly 2 hours before Dave ultimately secured Unit 73, the day had already taken on an uneasy edge that seasoned buyers could sense but not fully explain. Ivy Calvin arrived early, as he always did, and immediately noticed details that felt off. The facility had added security. 3 guards were visible instead of the usual single watchman, and unfamiliar vehicles were positioned deliberately around the perimeter, suggesting either law enforcement presence or private security contractors. "Something's not right today," Ivy muttered to Daryl Sheets when the gambler showed up with his son Brandon. Daryl agreed, his experienced gaze sweeping across the grounds with the caution of someone who had learned, often the hard way, that strange circumstances usually pointed to deeper trouble. "Feels like that Riverside auction," Daryl said quietly, "the one with the stolen medical equipment. Remember how tense everybody was acting?" The comparison was more accurate than either of them knew. As bidders gathered for the morning lineup, the usual chatter and competitive trash talk were noticeably absent. Instead, conversations were hushed, glances were cautious, and an undercurrent of nervous energy rippled through the crowd. When Mary Padian arrived, she looked visibly concerned, and quickly pulled Ivy aside. She whispered that she had heard rumors about a problem unit scheduled for auction, though her sources refused to explain exactly why it was considered dangerous. When Dan and Laura Dotson began the morning briefing, even Dan's trademark enthusiasm sounded strained. Laura kept checking her clipboard with an expression that hinted at information she found unsettling. "We've got 12 units today," Dan announced. "Same rules as always. You buy it, you own everything inside. No returns, no refunds, no complaints." The final words were delivered with unusual emphasis, as if he was signaling something unsaid. The first 3 units sold without issue, typical lockers filled with furniture and random clutter. But when the group approached Unit 73, the atmosphere shifted unmistakably. Dave noticed Dan slowing his pace. Laura hesitated before touching the lock. Most revealing of all, the facility manager, who usually stayed out of sight, stood nearby with his phone ready, clearly prepared to make a call at a moment's notice. Before bidding began, the woman in the black suit quietly showed Dan some form of identification. Dave, close enough to hear fragments, caught phrases like previous owner, federal interest, and monitor only. Dan's expression tightened, as if he were being briefed on something he didn't enjoy knowing. Once bidding started, the behavior grew stranger. The woman's bids were aggressive yet joyless, defensive rather than excited. Ivy watched her closely, using her reactions as a guide instead of trusting his own instincts. Daryl bowed out early, shaking his head. "I don't like this one," he warned aloud. "My gut says walk away." Dave, however, felt differently. He saw profit in the antique trunks, opportunity in the tension, and a challenge that stirred his competitive fire. When his winning bid was declared and he strode forward with confidence, he ignored the shaken heads around him. He ignored Daryl's quiet warning to be careful, and he ignored the woman in black now urgently speaking into her phone. Her eyes locked on Dave as he moved to claim Unit 73. The darkness beneath the lock. Dave's first move after officially claiming Unit 73 was to peel back the dusty sheets draped over the furniture near the entrance. Under the first covering sat a remarkably well-kept Victorian-era settee, the kind that could easily bring in $800 to $1,000 with the right buyer. A rush of triumph hit him. This alone suggested the gamble might pay off. Dave snapped several photos with his phone, his mind already running resale calculations. The next sheet, however, changed the mood entirely. Beneath it was a series of framed paintings that made him freeze. The artwork depicted dark, unsettling scenes filled with twisted forms and anguished faces. It felt less like creative expression and more like psychological torment captured on canvas. Dave had seen plenty of strange tastes in art over the years, but these pieces made his skin prickle. In the corner of each painting, written in blood-red paint, was the same signature: J. Morrison, 2019. "Getting interesting," Dave muttered, though there was no real enthusiasm in his voice. Ivy Calvin approached from behind, curiosity getting the better of him. "So, worth $2,500? Dave pointed to the settee and the artwork. Ivy let out a low whistle. "Furniture's solid," he said slowly, "but those paintings, I wouldn't want those anywhere near my house." Dave pushed farther into the unit, turning his attention to the boxes stacked behind the furniture. The first contained books that initially looked promising until he read the titles. Texts on criminal psychology, violence, antisocial behavior, and forensic case studies filled the box. Alone, they could belong to a student or professional. Combined with the artwork, they felt ominous. The second box stopped him cold. Inside were dozens of photographs, each sealed in plastic sleeves and sorted into labeled folders. These were not family pictures. They were surveillance shots, people photographed from a distance, unaware. Each folder listed a name, date range, and location. There were at least 30 individuals, tracked over months or even years. Dave's hands trembled. This was no collection. This was evidence. Obsession, stalking, control. His mind searched for explanations. Private investigator, unlikely. Law enforcement? This was far too personal, too methodical. "Ivy," Dave called sharply. "Get Dan, now!" As Ivy ran off, Dave opened another box. Inside were journals. Handwritten entries described the same individuals, not clinically, but possessively. Words that claimed ownership. His stomach twisted as the entries grew darker. Then came the antique trunks in the back corner. He had saved them for last, expecting valuables. The first opened to reveal women's clothing, neatly folded and labeled with names and dates. These were not abandoned belongings. They were trophies. The final trunk was secured with a modern lock. Every instinct warned him to stop. He didn't. Inside were licenses, credit cards, keys, and personal documents, and beneath them, a leather-bound ledger listing more than 50 names, each marked completed, in progress, or future target. Across every page, stamped in faded red ink, was one word that turned the unit into an active crime scene: disappeared. The shockwaves that followed. Dave staggered back from the trunk, his phone slipping from his shaking fingers and striking the concrete with a sharp echo. Ivy, posted near the unit entrance, took one look at Dave's face and instantly knew the discovery had moved beyond unsettling into outright danger. Dave, talk to me. What's in there?" he demanded. Dave couldn't answer. His mind was racing, struggling to reconcile decades of competitive treasure hunting with the reality that he had just bought a storage locker filled with what looked like evidence of serious crimes, possibly involving abduction or worse. Dan Dotson arrived moments later with the facility manager, both responding to Ivy's frantic call. One glance at Dave's ashen expression was enough. Dan's demeanor hardened as he radioed security. "No one else steps into this unit," he ordered, his familiar auctioneer charm gone. "And someone find that woman in the black suit, immediately." She appeared almost instantly, as if she had never been far. Standing closer, Dave noticed the federal badge clipped at her waist: FBI, Special Agent Rebecca Torres. As the name registered, his mind connected it to one of the folders he had seen earlier. Jennifer Torres. The agent entered the unit, her professional posture steady, though Dave caught the flicker of something deeply personal in her eyes when she saw the open trunks. "My sister," Agent Torres said softly. "Jennifer Torres disappeared 3 years ago. We've been tracking the owner of this unit for 18 months. When he died in a car accident 6 months ago, the trail went cold. We knew this unit existed, but legal barriers stopped us from accessing it without a warrant or buying it through a legitimate auction." Shock gave way to anger. "So you knew?" Dave snapped. "You knew civilians could bid on evidence tied to crimes like this?" His voice climbed until the agent raised her hand. "We had an agent prepared to bid higher, but you exceeded our authorized limit. Once you won, we needed either your cooperation or new legal grounds." Dave let out a brittle laugh. "Cooperation? I paid $2,500 to inherit a nightmare. You'll get my cooperation, but I've got a lot of questions." By then, whispers spread through the facility. Daryl Sheets pushed forward, concern overriding rivalry. Before answers came, police arrived, turning Unit 73 into an active crime scene. Yellow tape went up. More agents followed. Evidence teams moved in. Dan and Laura Dotson gave detailed statements, both visibly shaken by how close their auction had come to disaster. Within an hour, news vans crowded the lot. This was no ordinary Storage Wars headline. As Dave sat under the building's narrow shade, Laura handed him water. His hands were steady now, but his thoughts were not. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Dave said to no one in particular. 30 years of storage auctions, and I thought I'd seen everything. But this changes everything." As the afternoon stretched on, Dave was escorted through multiple interviews. Detectives asked him to recount every detail of the bidding, every item he touched, every moment from the instant the unit door rolled up. What once felt like routine instincts now replayed as warning signs he wished he had recognized sooner. The aggressive bidding, the woman's controlled intensity, the pity in her expression when he won. Each memory tightened like a knot. Around the facility, buyers stood in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones. The usual laughter and trash talk were gone. Ivy watched Dave from a distance, shaken not just by what had been found, but by how easily it could have been missed. "We open these lockers like they're games," Ivy muttered to Mary Padian, who stood with her arms folded tightly. "But sometimes they're not games at all." Mary said nothing, her face pale as she stared at the blocked-off unit, imagining the lives behind the names in those files. Agent Torres moved methodically, overseeing the cataloging of every item. Each photograph, each journal page, each labeled article of clothing was sealed and documented. For her, this was not just procedure, it was personal. Dave noticed the way she paused briefly over one of the folders before handing it off to a technician, her jaw tightening as if to keep control. In that moment, the story stopped being abstract to him. These were not just disturbing objects. They were fragments of real people's lives, stolen and stored away. As evening approached, the facility slowly emptied. Auctions were canceled for the rest of the day. The concrete corridors felt colder. stripped of their usual chaos. Dave signed additional paperwork, formally transferring control of the unit's contents to federal custody. Legally, it was still his purchase, but morally, it felt like a burden he was desperate to set down. Driving home later, long after the cameras stopped rolling, Dave found himself gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. Every storage unit he passed, every roadside building felt different now. The thrill of the hunt, the rush of competition suddenly seemed fragile. He realized that beneath the excitement of winning bids and uncovering valuables lay a truth he could never ignore again. Some doors were closed for a reason. That night, sleep did not come easily. The images returned in fragments, the names, the careful labels, the stamped word that refused to leave his thoughts. Dave understood that his career, his confidence, and his sense of control had all been altered in a single day. He had walked into the auction expecting profit and walked out carrying the weight of dozens of unseen stories. And as he stared into the darkness, one thought echoed louder than any auction call he had ever shouted. This was not just another episode, this was a line he could never step back across. Secrets long buried come to light. Over the following 48 hours, as FBI forensic teams carefully inventoried every object inside Unit 73, a portrait of the former owner began to take shape, one that was both heartbreaking and deeply disturbing. James Morrison was identified as a 42-year-old software engineer, highly intelligent and technically gifted, yet profoundly isolated and mentally unstable. According to Agent Torres, who briefed Dave as a professional courtesy in recognition of his cooperation and the trauma he had endured, Morrison suffered from what psychologists labeled erotomania paired with compulsive surveillance. This disorder led him to believe that several women were secretly in love with him and somehow depended on his constant protection. What began as seemingly harmless photography slowly escalated. Morrison initially took pictures of women he encountered in ordinary public settings like cafes, supermarkets, and parks. Over time, his fixation intensified. He started following them, documenting their habits, learning addresses, and collecting personal items they unknowingly left behind. The leather-bound ledger Dave uncovered detailed 5 years of escalating obsession. The repeated appearance of the word disappeared, besides certain names, triggered a major expansion of the FBI investigation. During a follow-up meeting at the FBI field office, Dave asked the question weighing heavily on him. How many? Agent Torres paused before answering, the investigator momentarily giving way to a grieving sister. We are still confirming, she said, but early findings suggest at least 8 individuals in Morrison's records align with missing persons cases from Southern California between 2017 and 2021. The number stunned Dave. 8 lives, 8 families waiting for answers. When Dave asked about Morrison's death, Agent Torres revealed a chilling update. Evidence now suggested that Morrison intentionally caused the fatal crash after realizing authorities were closing in. He chose death over accountability, believing his secrets would vanish with him. The storage unit proved otherwise. Media attention exploded. Dave was suddenly portrayed not as a loud auction personality, but as the man who opened a door hiding unspeakable truths. Interviews flooded in. Headlines grew sensational. True crime platforms dissected every detail. What affected Dave most, however, were the victims themselves. Sarah Mitchell called him personally, thanking him for validating years of fear and doubt. Others followed, each message reinforcing the same truth. They were never imagining it. Proof had finally surfaced. Support poured in from the Storage Wars community. Daryl checked on Dave daily. Ivy organized private discussions on safety protocols. Mary established a counseling fund. Even longtime rivals offered support, recognizing that this moment transcended competition. The discovery sparked industry-wide debate about auction ethics, but Dave felt distant from it. His understanding had fundamentally changed. Storage units were no longer just profit opportunities to him. They were frozen fragments of real lives, holding memories, secrets, and sometimes unimaginable darkness, sealed away when the doors first closed. The reckoning and a new resolve. 6 weeks after the shocking discovery, Dave Hester made a choice that stunned nearly everyone who knew him. He publicly announced that he would be stepping away from storage auctions for an indefinite period, putting distance between himself and the storage war's spotlight that had defined his image for more than a decade. In an interview with the LA Times, Dave explained his decision plainly. "I need time to process what I walked into," he said. "I need to figure out how to move forward in an industry I thought I understood completely, but now see very differently." The news rippled through the storage auction world. Dave Hester, the unstoppable voice behind Yup, taking a step back felt almost unreal. For many, it signaled the close of a chapter. Those closest to him, however, recognized that it was not an ending but a reassessment. What Dave uncovered inside Unit 73 had altered him at a core level. This was not a challenge that could be outbid or outmaneuvered. It demanded reflection, not aggression. Before the FBI officially concluded its investigation into Morrison's crimes, Agent Torres contacted Dave one last time. She wanted him to understand the impact of what he had uncovered. The materials from the storage unit had conclusively solved 4 cold cases. 3 missing individuals were located, not alive, but their families finally had answers. 5 additional cases remained open, now supported by leads that had not existed before Dave opened the trunks. The call was heavy with emotion. When Dave asked about Jennifer, Agent Torres paused. She confirmed that her sister was among those identified. Jennifer's remains had been found 2 weeks earlier. Though devastating, it brought closure. Agent Torres thanked Dave for continuing to look when every instinct must have told him to stop. A month later, the Core Storage Wars group gathered privately at a quiet Costa Mesa restaurant. There were no cameras, no producers, only the people who had shared years of competition and camaraderie. Daryl lifted a glass to Dave, praising the grace he showed in an impossible situation. Ivy spoke next, acknowledging that Dave had reminded them all that their business involved more than profit and rivalry. Even long-standing competitors admitted that the experience had permanently changed how they viewed the auction world. Dave's own words defined the moment. He reflected that for 30 years he believed he was a treasure hunter, separating value from junk. But Unit 73 taught him something deeper. Storage buyers are witnesses to human lives, stories, and secrets. With that role comes responsibility, especially when those stories are too painful to be treated as entertainment. Industry changes soon followed. New voluntary guidelines were introduced to address discoveries involving potential crimes, and even former skeptics became supporters. Dave eventually returned to auctions, more cautious and more aware. His familiar call still rang out, but now it carried restraint and understanding. Letters continued to arrive from victims, including one from Sarah Mitchell, thanking Dave for validating her fear and restoring her sense of reality. Dave kept the letter framed, a reminder that Unit 73 cost him $2,500 but gave him something far more valuable. When asked later if he regretted opening the unit, Dave answered carefully. He wished he did not have to carry those images. But he was grateful he was the one who found them, because he handled it right. And sometimes even the darkest discovery can lead to meaning and purpose. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are not measured in money, but in the lives they touch and the truths they uncover. What Dave found behind that storage door was never meant to be profit or entertainment. It was a reminder that every closed unit holds a human story, and some stories demand courage, responsibility, and compassion when they are finally revealed. If this journey moved you, take a moment to reflect on the unseen lives behind everyday places. Share this story with others who value truth over spectacle. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more real stories where mystery, humanity, and consequence collide.